You ever see someone push their luck so far that they end up creating their own nightmare? That's exactly what happened when HOA Karen decided to poison my lake because she didn't like how it looked green during algae season. She thought she could control nature, but I had other plans. And trust me, watching her panic in that water when my little surprise showed up, that's a sight I'll never forget. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. I grew up believing that every man needs a place where the noise of the world can't touch him, a refuge, a sanctuary. For me, that place has always been water. Maybe it's because my father taught me how to fish on a quiet lake in Georgia when I was just a kid. Or maybe it's because my life has been filled with enough battles that I learned to crave the sound of still water more than any applause or victory. So, when I retired and finally bought my dream property, a 5-acre spread with a private lake out back, it felt like the closing chapter of a long, hard novel. The lake wasn't just a piece of land to me, it was a living, breathing part of who I am. Every morning, I'd wake up with the sun, grab a cup of strong black coffee, and sit on the small dock I built with my own hands. I'd watch the mist rise off the surface, listen to the soft ripple of water, and feel like I owned something no one could take away peace. But I was wrong. You see, the neighborhood I moved into wasn't just any neighborhood, it was under the iron rule of the local HOA. And among its so-called board members, one person stood out like a thorn, Karen. If you've ever dealt with an HOA, you know there's always one, the kind who believes their personal opinions are the law, who acts like they own every square inch of land. Karen was that person, turned up to 100. She was in her late 50s, always strutting around with that sharp tone of voice that could slice through steel, and wearing those oversized sunglasses even when the sun wasn't out. People joked that she could see through walls with those things. The first day I met her, she told me not to ask me to trim back the wildflowers near my driveway because they don't match the neighborhood's aesthetic. That should have been my first clue that trouble was coming. At first, I ignored her. I wasn't there to make waves, just to live quietly by my lake. But then she started fixating on the lake itself. Every summer, like clockwork, a natural algae bloom would coat the water in a faint green hue. It wasn't dangerous, just nature doing what nature does. I'd read about it and even talked to local environmental officers who told me the bloom was actually healthy for the fish population. Karen didn't care. One afternoon, I was sitting on my dock when she marched across my yard like she owned the place, clutching a clipboard like some kind of self-appointed sheriff. "Your lake looks disgusting," she barked. "It's ruining the neighborhood's curb appeal. You need to clean it up." I looked at her, sipping my coffee, and calmly said, "Karen, it's a lake. It's supposed to look like nature, not a swimming pool." She didn't like that answer. From that day forward, I started receiving friendly reminders from the HOA about maintaining the visual quality of the neighborhood. What they meant was, do something about your lake or we'll fine you. Each letter was written in that overly polite, passive-aggressive tone that made my blood boil. Still, I tried to keep my cool. I'd seen enough wars in life to know which ones were worth fighting. And at that point, I figured Karen would eventually get bored and move on to harassing someone else. But that woman was relentless. Every time I stepped outside, I'd see her staring from across the street, whispering to her friends. Sometimes she'd even take photos of my lake, as if she was building a case against me. I remember telling my buddy Hank he's a retired cop who lives down the road about the situation. He laughed and said, "Man, you need to watch that one. She's the type who'll push you until you snap." He was right. That lake meant everything to me. I'd stocked it with bass, built a small rowboat, and even set up a fire pit nearby where my family would gather on cool evenings. To see someone treat it like some unsightly stain on her perfect world, it cut deeper than I realized. By late spring, the tension between us was thick enough to choke on. Karen's voice would echo across the yards whenever she saw me, throwing out remarks like, "Some of us actually care about property values." I didn't rise to her bait, at least not yet. But deep down, I knew this battle wasn't going to end with polite words. Something was coming. I could feel it, like the heaviness in the air before a summer storm. What I didn't know was that Karen was about to take things far beyond HOA letters and idle threats. She was about to cross a line that no neighbor should ever cross. And when she did, I promised myself one thing: I'd make sure she'd regret it for the rest of her life. The letters from the HOA kept coming like clockwork, one after another, as if Karen had made it her personal mission to drain every ounce of joy from my lake. They were always dressed up in fancy HOA language words like community standards and visual harmony, but I could see her fingerprints all over them. It wasn't just the letters. Every time I walked outside to check my mailbox or sit by the dock, Karen would make sure she was out front, too. She'd cross her arms, tilt her head like she was appraising some broken piece of furniture, and mutter things just loud enough for me to hear. Green scum isn't exactly inviting. Some people just don't take pride in their property. I started calling her the hawk in my head because she never stopped watching. I swear, if a leaf fell into my yard, she'd probably write me a letter about raking it. The rest of the neighborhood wasn't blind to her antics either. One evening, I was talking to an older couple, Dave and Linda, who lived 3 houses down. They shook their heads and warned me, she's been like this with everyone. Last year, she tried to have someone fined for leaving a pumpkin on their porch past Thanksgiving. A pumpkin, I laughed, but it wasn't funny when I was the one in her crosshairs. The tipping point came during an HOA meeting I reluctantly attended in early summer. Karen was sitting right up front, her hands clasped like a queen on her throne. The moment the topic of my lake came up, she launched into a tirade. "It's unsightly," she snapped. "We're trying to maintain a high standard here. The algae is ruining property values and giving our neighborhood a bad reputation. Do you know how many guests have asked me if we live next to a swamp?" I calmly explained that algae blooms were natural, seasonal, and even beneficial for fish. I even brought photos from local environmental websites to prove my point. But logic wasn't something Karen cared for. She scoffed. "It's not about your so-called science. It's about appearances. If you can't keep it clean, maybe you shouldn't have a lake." I could feel my jaw clench. The sheer arrogance of this woman made my blood pressure spike. I wanted to tell her exactly where she could shove her standards, but I bit my tongue. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my cool. Not yet. After the meeting, a few neighbors patted me on the back, whispering that they thought Karen was going too far. Hank, my retired cop buddy, gave me a look and muttered, "She's poking the wrong bear." But Karen wasn't done. Over the next couple of weeks, I noticed her walking around the perimeter of my property more often. One time, I caught her taking photos of the lake from across the street. Another time, she left a printout on my porch with links to companies that specialize in algae removal. It was clear she wasn't just annoyed. She was obsessed. The funny part, the lake looked beautiful to me. The soft green on the water's surface, the way sunlight danced on it, it was nature's artwork. But to Karen, it was a personal insult. I remember the day she came storming over while I was out fixing a loose board on my dock. "You have to do something about that water," she yelled, her voice shrill enough to scare the birds from the trees. I turned to her, hammer in hand, and said evenly, "Karen, it's a lake, not a swimming pool. Nature doesn't take orders from HOA guidelines." Her face turned red. "We'll see about that," she snapped before stomping off. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was planning something. Karen wasn't the type to just accept a no. She was the type to plot, to push, and to cross boundaries that decent neighbors wouldn't dare cross. The very next morning, I saw her standing by the edge of the lake, just staring at it like she was calculating her next move. Something about that look sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know it yet, but Karen was about to escalate this petty war in a way that would forever change how I looked at her and how I dealt with her. The line between annoyance and all-out war was about to be crossed. It was early Wednesday morning when I noticed something was wrong. Usually, the lake was calm and alive, the kind of place where you could watch the reflection of the sunrise and feel your soul quiet down. But that morning, the surface looked unnatural, dull, and grayish, as if something had smothered its life. I walked down to the dock, my coffee forgotten in the kitchen, and the smell hit me before I even got close. It wasn't the fresh, earthy scent of water and plants I was used to. No, this was sharp, chemical, and wrong. Then I saw the fish, dozens of them, floating belly up, their silver scales glinting in the morning light like warning signals. For a moment, I just stood there, staring, my hands curling into fists. My lake, my sanctuary, had been poisoned. I crouched down and dipped a stick into the water, lifting it close to my nose. The smell burned, making my stomach turn. It wasn't just a minor algae treatment or some natural reaction. This was deliberate. Someone had dumped something toxic into my lake, and I knew, deep down, exactly who it was. Karen, I muttered under my breath, my voice shaking with anger. I grabbed my phone and called Hank. Hank, I need you over here. Someone poisoned my lake. Fish are dying, and the water smells like bleach mixed with death. 15 minutes later, Hank's old pickup pulled into my driveway. He's a retired cop, and I trust his instincts more than anyone's. He walked straight to the dock, crouched beside me, and took one sniff of the water. "That's no accident," he said grimly. "This is chemical. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." "Karen," I repeated, clenching my jaw. "You got cameras." "Right," Hank asked. "Check them. If she stepped 1 foot on your land, we'll nail her to the wall." I rushed back to the house and pulled up my security footage from the night before. It didn't take long. There she was, Karen, even in the dark. Her platinum blonde hair caught the motion sensor light. She was wearing dark clothes, sneaking around the edge of my property like a criminal. And in her hands, a large white container with a bright hazard symbol on the side. I felt my blood pressure spike. I'd put up with her harassment, her letters, her condescending attitude, but this, she had declared war. I stormed out of the house, evidence still on my phone, and crossed the street. She was in her front yard wearing her usual pastel blouse and oversized sunglasses, trimming her rose bushes like nothing was wrong. "Karen," I roared. She turned slowly, like a queen annoyed by some lowly peasant. "Yes," she said sweetly. I held up my phone with the footage paused on her face. "Explain this. You were at my lake last night. What were you doing with that container?" Her smile faltered. For a second, I saw panic flash in her eyes, but then her chin lifted defiantly. "I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe it was a trespasser." "Don't you dare lie to me," I growled, stepping closer. "I've got you on camera. You poisoned my water. Do you know how many laws you just broke? That's not just property damage. That's a criminal act." Karen crossed her arms, her mouth curling into a smirk. "If you had taken care of that swamp like we asked, I wouldn't have had to do anything." "It's disgusting. Someone had to do what you wouldn't." There it was, her confession, dripping with arrogance. "You're going to regret this," I said, my voice low but firm. "You don't get to destroy what's mine and walk away smiling. You crossed a line you can't come back from." She rolled her eyes. "The HOA will back me up. They know I'm right. Good luck trying to fight all of us." I turned and walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, from rage. Back at the house, Hank was still by the dock, shaking his head. I showed him the footage, and he let out a low whistle. "She's done. Man, with this evidence and the water test, she's looking at fines. Maybe worse. But I know that look on your face, you're not just thinking about calling the cops. Are you?" He was right. As I stood there, looking at the lifeless fish, something hardened in me. This lake wasn't just water. It was my home, my memories, my peace. Karen had defiled it. I didn't just want justice. I wanted her to understand exactly what it felt like to mess with something you can't control. That's when the idea first sparked, a wild, borderline crazy idea that made me grin despite my anger. What if the next time she set foot in that water, she met something scarier than algae? Something that would make her think twice before ever touching my lake again. I pulled out my phone and began researching. And that's when I read about piranhas. I wasn't the type to let things slide. Not when someone had come onto my land and poisoned what I loved most. That lake was mine. It wasn't just water. It was the place I went to think, to breathe, to remember all the hard years I'd fought through. Karen had stomped on all of that like it meant nothing. And now, I was determined to hold her accountable. The first thing I did was gather every shred of evidence I could. I saved the security footage in multiple copies, one on my computer, another on an external hard drive, and even one uploaded to a private cloud. I wasn't going to risk accidentally losing the one thing that could prove her guilt. Next, I took samples of the lake water and dead fish, sealed them in containers, and sent them to a local environmental lab Hank recommended. When I explained what I suspected, the technician on the phone whistled. If she dumped what I think she did, not only is that illegal, but the fines are going to be heavy. You could press charges. Charges! That word kept echoing in my head. I wasn't out for money, I didn't need her cash, but I wanted her to feel the weight of the law pressing down on her shoulders. A couple of days later, the lab results came back. The water was laced with copper sulfate and a mix of harsh chemicals that had no business being there in that quantity. It was strong enough to kill off fish, frogs, and anything else unlucky enough to live in my lake. There was no question this was sabotage. I printed the results, tucked the screenshots of the security footage into a folder, and prepared to confront her at the next HOA meeting. I wanted her to have no way out, no chance to twist the truth. When the night came, I walked into the community clubhouse with Hank by my side. The room was filled with neighbors, some of whom were already whispering as I entered. Karen was seated in the front row, legs crossed, looking smug as ever. The meeting started with the usual agenda: lawn maintenance, parking complaints, and other nonsense, but when my turn came, I didn't waste time. I stood up, placed the folder on the table, and said, "I need everyone here to see what's been happening with my lake." Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go again." I opened the folder and spread out the photos: dead fish floating in the water, screenshots of her sneaking onto my property with the chemical container, and finally, the lab report. The room went silent as I spoke. "This," I said, pointing to the photos, "is what happens when someone decides they're above the law. My lake has been poisoned. Fish have died. And this woman I turned and locked eyes with, Karen, was caught on camera doing it." Karen's face turned pale for just a moment, but she quickly masked it with a sneer. "This is ridiculous. That footage could be anyone. And what proof do you have that I even touched the water?" I hit play on a short clip from the footage I'd brought on a USB drive. The video played on the screen in front of everyone. There she was, unmistakable in the harsh glare of the motion light, pouring something into my lake. Gasps filled the room. "That's enough. Karen," I said firmly. "You admitted to me in person that you did it, and now the whole neighborhood can see the truth." She jumped up, pointing her finger at me. "This is harassment. You're just trying to make me look bad because you refuse to take care of that filthy water." I leaned in slightly, my voice low but clear. "No, Karen, this isn't harassment. This is me showing everyone who you really are, a bully who thinks she can destroy other people's property without consequence." For once, Karen didn't have a snappy comeback. The HOA board members shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. One of them finally cleared his throat and said, "Karen, this is a serious accusation. We need to review this evidence and consider taking legal action." Karen's jaw dropped. "Legal action against me? I'm the one trying to keep this place looking decent?" Hank stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, what you did is a criminal offense. You could face fines, lawsuits, even charges for environmental damage." I could see the fear creeping into her eyes now, though she tried to mask it with outrage. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. The room fell silent for a moment before the HOA president turned to me. "We'll investigate this further. In the meantime, you have our support to do whatever you need to restore your lake." As I walked out that night, I felt a small measure of satisfaction. Karen had been exposed, but I also knew she wasn't the type to go down quietly. She'd be back, one way or another. And that's when I decided that simply exposing her wasn't enough. No, I needed something that would teach her once and for all not to mess with me or my lake. That's when I finalized my plan for the Piranhas. The night after the HOA meeting, I sat on my dock staring at the dark water. The lake was quiet, almost too quiet, like it knew something had changed. Karen's attack had left a scar not just on the water, but on me. This wasn't just about algae or HOA politics anymore. This was personal. I replayed the events over and over in my head. Karen sneaking around with her container of poison, the arrogance on her face when she practically admitted it to me, and the smug way she'd stormed out of that meeting. If she thought she could scare me or push me into selling out, she was dead wrong. I wanted a solution that would restore the lake, but also send a message, a permanent one. Something that said, don't mess with me and don't mess with what's mine. That's when I started researching ways to naturally restore a lake's balance. While doing that, I stumbled across something that made me grin like a wolf predator fish. The idea was simple: add a predator species that would thrive, clean up smaller fish populations, and bring the lake back to life. Most people went for bass or catfish, but me, I was looking for something with more bite. That's when I read about piranhas. Now, I know what you're thinking: piranhas in a private lake. But hear me out. Contrary to the Hollywood horror stories, piranhas aren't mindless killers. They're opportunistic feeders. They keep the ecosystem balanced and, yes, they have sharp teeth, which means anyone who dips their hand, or worse, their whole body into my water without permission will get the message real quick. The thought of Karen, queen of the HOA, having to explain why she'll never swim in my lake again, well, that was enough to make me smile for the first time in weeks. I spent days crafting the plan. First, I talked to a buddy of mine named Rick, who runs a small exotic fish shop just outside town. Rick's the kind of guy who doesn't ask too many questions if you pay in cash and bring him a good story. "You want piranhas?" he asked, raising an eyebrow as he leaned on the counter. "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone casual. "I'm not looking to turn my lake into a horror movie. Just something to keep people from messing with it. HOA types." Rick chuckled. "Man, you're the first guy I've met who wants to scare people instead of impress them with koi fish." He walked me through the types of piranhas he could get, how they behaved, and how to handle them responsibly. I made sure to do this right, not just dumping them in, but creating an environment where they'd thrive without damaging the natural balance. Over the next week, I built a small holding pen near the dock, just big enough to keep the fish in until I was ready. I stocked the lake with some live bait fish to keep them fed and happy. While I was working on this, Karen wasn't staying quiet. She'd stopped talking to me directly, but I noticed her lurking near the lake again, whispering to other board members. A couple of neighbors mentioned that she'd been ranting about dangerous things in the water. Maybe she'd caught a whiff of what I was planning, or maybe she was just paranoid. Either way, I didn't care. The day I released the piranhas into the lake felt like reclaiming my territory. I carefully lowered the pen into the water and let them swim free, their silver bodies flashing beneath the surface. They moved like shadows, quick and efficient, vanishing into the deeper parts of the lake. I stood on the dock, hands on my hips, and muttered, "Welcome home, boys." But my plan wasn't just about stocking the lake with fish. No, I needed the perfect moment to make sure Karen understood what she'd done and why she should never, ever mess with me again. That moment came faster than I expected. Just a few days later, Karen announced that she was hosting a lake cleanup party. I don't know if it was her way of mocking me, or if she honestly thought she could wade into my lake and fix something she didn't understand. She invited a few friends over, all dressed up in their matching swimsuits and sunglasses, ready to show off their HOA spirit. I sat on my porch with a cold drink, watching them like a hawk, waiting for the perfect time. They walked down to the shore, laughing, pointing at the water, and complaining loudly about the ugly green color. Karen led the charge, of course, holding some kind of pool skimmer like she was about to do battle with nature itself. That's when I smiled. "Go ahead, Karen," I muttered under my breath. "Take a swim. See what you've stirred up now." Saturday afternoon rolled around, and the HOA circus was in full swing. Karen had invited half the neighborhood to her so-called lake cleanup party, though it looked more like a poolside social event gone wrong. She strutted around the shore in a bright pink swimsuit, barking orders at her friends like some self-appointed lifeguard queen. I stayed back on my porch, leaning against the railing with a glass of iced tea. From my spot, I had a perfect view of the entire scene. Hank was with me, sitting in a lawn chair, watching the chaos unfold. "Are they seriously going in there?" Hank asked, squinting toward the lake. "Oh, they're going in," I said, my voice calm but edged with satisfaction. "And they're about to learn something they'll never forget." Karen's friends, 3 women around her age, and 1 guy who looked like he regretted accepting the invitation, followed her lead. They waded into the water, squealing at the coolness like kids on the first day of summer camp. Karen, of course, dove right in, splashing around as if this was her personal swimming pool. "She's out of her mind," Hank muttered. "She's acting like this is public property." "It's not," I replied, "and she's about to find out how private it really is." The piranhas had been settling into their new home for a few days, and I knew they were hungry, though not dangerously so. Contrary to the myths, piranhas don't just attack anything that moves, but when they sense food or a disturbance, they investigate fast. Karen was splashing her arms, kicking her legs, and laughing louder than anyone else. It was like she was daring the lake to fight back. Then it happened. One of the women screamed, a sharp, piercing sound that made everyone freeze. "Something just bit me," she shouted, frantically thrashing toward the shore. Karen laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's probably just a fish brushing past you." But then another shriek rang out, this time from Karen herself. She shot up from the water like she'd been electrocuted. "What the something's nipping at my legs?" Her friends started panicking, splashing and kicking, which only made the piranhas swarm faster. Curious about the commotion, Hank chuckled under his breath. "This is better than cable TV." I didn't say a word. I just sipped my tea and watched the chaos unfold. Karen was now full on screaming, her face pale and her arms flailing as she tried to get to the shore. "Get out! Get out! Something's attacking us!" The guy in the group wasn't wasting any time. He practically ran on water, trying to reach the shallows. The women scrambled behind him, shrieking with every splash. By the time they stumbled out onto the muddy shore, they looked like they'd just survived a war zone. Karen stood there, dripping wet, her pink swimsuit smeared with algae and mud. She was breathing hard, her wide eyes darting back to the lake like it had turned into a monster. "What is in that water?" she demanded, pointing at me across the yard. I raised my glass of iced tea in a slow, calm salute. "Just nature doing what nature does," I said, my voice carrying over the stillness that followed their screaming. You did this," she shouted, her voice shaking. "You put something dangerous in there." I shrugged. "It's a private lake. Karen, you and your friends weren't invited. If you don't like the lake, maybe you should stay out of it." Her face turned crimson, part embarrassment and part rage. Her friends, meanwhile, looked like they wanted nothing more to do with her or the cleanup party. One by one, they grabbed their towels and left without saying much. Hank leaned over and whispered, "I think you just won round one." I smiled but didn't answer. This wasn't just round one, it was the knockout punch Karen didn't see coming. From now on, every time she looked at my lake, she'd remember that panicked swim, the bites, and the realization that she couldn't control everything around her. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had the upper hand. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted to make sure the HOA, the neighborhood, and Karen herself knew the score my property was off limits, and anyone who tried to mess with me would regret it. The piranhas had made their point. Now it was time to finish this feud once and for all. Karen's so-called lake cleanup had turned into a full-blown disaster, but the real show was just beginning. After the initial chaos, I saw her pacing near the shore, still dripping wet, her hands flailing as she tried to explain to her remaining friend what had just happened. Even from my porch, I could hear her voice shrill, panicked, and filled with that same arrogance that had started all this. "They're dangerous. There's something in that lake. Did you see how it bit me?" she cried, holding up her leg for emphasis. I couldn't see any marks from where I was, but I knew the piranhas had given her a scare. That was enough for me. Her friend, the last holdout who hadn't left yet, looked skeptical. "Karen, are you sure it's not just your imagination? Maybe it was a regular fish." "Regular fish don't have teeth like that," Karen snapped. I felt something sharp. I could have been killed. I almost laughed out loud. Piranhas aren't deadly to humans unless you're bleeding and thrashing like a wild animal, which, ironically, is exactly what Karen had been doing. I stepped off my porch and started walking down toward the dock, Hank trailing behind me with a smirk on his face. Karen saw me coming and straightened up, her face a mix of fear and fury. "What's in that lake?" she demanded, pointing at the water like it had personally offended her. "Fish," I replied calmly. You know, the kind that live in lakes. Don't play dumb with me, she shot back, her voice trembling. You did something. This is dangerous. You can't just, I interrupted, my tone firm. This is my private property. Karen, you had no right to be in that water in the first place. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trespassing. Her jaw dropped. Trespassing. We were trying to help. We were cleaning it up. Hank couldn't hold it in anymore. He chuckled. Lady, I don't think he needed your kind of help. Karen turned on him, pointing her finger. This is harassment. I'm going to the HOA. They'll shut this lake down if they have to. I tilted my head, narrowing my eyes. Go ahead. Show them the video of you and your friends trespassing on my property and screaming like kids. I've got it all on camera. The color drained from her face. She knew I wasn't bluffing. I had cameras everywhere, and every second of her panic swim was already saved on my hard drive. You wouldn't, she hissed. Try me, I said, my voice like steel. Karen looked back at the lake, as if expecting the fish to leap out and attack her again. She backed away slowly, her bravado crumbling. Her last friend muttered something about getting out of here and walked off, leaving Karen standing there alone, soaked and humiliated. As she left, I called out, "Next time, stay out of the water. It's not meant for HOA parties." She didn't respond, but I could tell by the stiff way she marched back to her house that she'd gotten the message. Later that evening, I sat on the dock with Hank, watching the sunset reflect off the water. The lake looked peaceful again, as if it was reclaiming itself. "You really think she's done?" Hank asked, taking a sip from his beer. "She's not stupid," I said. "She might be stubborn, but after today, I doubt she'll ever step foot near this water again." We both laughed quietly, replaying the scene in our heads, the screams, the splashing, the sheer panic on Karen's face. It was almost cinematic, like something out of a revenge film. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about revenge. It was about respect. This was my land, my home, and I wasn't about to let anyone, especially someone like Karen, bully me into submission. The next day, I made sure the video clip of her panic swim was backed up in 3 places, just in case she tried anything crazy with the HOA again. If she wanted to play games, I was ready to win every round. From that point on, I didn't see her near the lake. She kept her distance, glaring from across the street whenever I walked outside. And every time our eyes met, I could see the memory of that water flashing through her mind. But the story wasn't over yet. I still had one last card to play, something that would make sure the entire HOA understood that I wasn't someone to be pushed around. After the panic swim, word spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire. I didn't have to say a thing. Everyone who wasn't at the lake that day had already heard some version of the story. By Sunday evening, neighbors were stopping by my driveway, half whispering their amusement. Karen screaming like a Banshee Dave. The older guy from down the street chuckled. "Wish I'd been there to see that." Linda, his wife, shook her head with a smile. "Maybe now she'll stop poking her nose where it doesn't belong." I just shrugged. She got the message. I think we all know who's been causing the real trouble around here. But I wasn't fully satisfied, not yet. Karen was like a cornered animal. When embarrassed, she'd strike back harder. I wanted to make sure she understood that this war was over and that I wasn't going to let her or the HOA trample my rights again. The following week, I attended the next HOA meeting, not to argue, but to finish this once and for all. When I walked in, people were already buzzing, glancing at me like they were expecting drama. Karen was seated at the end of the table, her arms crossed, trying to look composed but failing miserably. The HOA president, Mr. Whitaker, cleared his throat and started with routine matters. Then, with a nervous glance at me, he said, "We've had reports of an incident involving the lake." Before Karen could open her mouth, I spoke up. "Yes, there was an incident. Karen and her friends trespassed on my property without permission, and they were caught on camera. I'd be happy to share the footage with anyone who needs clarification." Karen turned bright red. "We were trying to clean up your disgusting lake. It's a health hazard." I smiled, calm and steady. "A health hazard. Funny. Because I had the water tested after someone caught on camera dumped toxic chemicals into it, Turns out it was your cleaning that caused harm, not nature. The lab report's right here. If anyone's interested. I set the folder on the table. Everyone leaned forward, their eyes flicking between me and Karen. This is outrageous. Karen sputtered. You're just trying to make me look bad. No, Karen, I said firmly, my voice cutting through the room. You did that all by yourself. You trespassed. You vandalized my property. And now the entire neighborhood knows what happens when you cross the line. There was a long silence before Mr. Whitaker sighed. Karen, this isn't the first time we've had complaints about your overreach. The board will be reviewing this matter. But for now, I suggest you leave the lake and your neighbor alone. For once, Karen didn't have a comeback. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, muttering under her breath. When the meeting ended, several neighbors came up to me, patting me on the back. You did the right thing. One man said, she's been a nightmare for years. Someone needed to put her in her place. By the time I walked home, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The battle was over. Karen wouldn't be knocking on my door, yelling about algae or sneaking around my property again. And as for the HOA, they now understood that I wasn't someone they could bully with letters and fake rules. That night, I sat on the dock with Hank, watching the stars shimmer on the water's surface. The piranhas moved silently below, a strange but fitting reminder of how I'd turned the tables. You think she'll ever come near here again? Hank asked. I smirked. Not unless she wants another swim with my friends down there. We both laughed, the sound rolling across the lake like a victory bell. The lake was alive again. The fish population was stabilizing, the water clearing, and my peace had returned. Most importantly, the neighborhood understood the truth. I wasn't just some quiet retiree with a fishing pole. I was someone who protected what was his, and I did it with a mix of patience, cunning, and just the right touch of payback. I leaned back, breathing in the cool night air. You know, Hank, I said, some people learn the easy way. Others, they need a little persuasion. He raised his beer in a toast. To persuasion. I clinked my glass against his. To justice. And for the first time in months, I felt like the lake and my life was truly mine again. Sometimes life has a way of testing just how much we're willing to stand up for ourselves. Karen thought she could bully me into submission, but in the end, she learned that crossing the wrong man, especially one who values his peace, comes with consequences. That lake wasn't just water and fish. It was my sanctuary, my little piece of freedom, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that from me. As I sit on my dock now, watching the ripples shimmer under the evening sky, I feel a deep sense of satisfaction, not because I won some petty neighborhood battle, but because I proved that no one, not even an HOA Karen, can strip away what truly matters. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone watching this, it's this: stand your ground, protect what's yours, and when someone tries to poison your peace, don't just sit back and let it happen. Find your own way to fight back, with a calm but unwavering hand. Thank you for joining me through this story. If you've ever had to deal with a Karen in your life, you know the feeling. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Share your own experiences. And tell me, how would you have handled it? And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next tale of justice served.